Hey everybody, this is Rustin Rose of Access Entertainment Metalholic Magazine. With us today, Jeff and Sarah Teets of MindMaze. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Hey, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm glad we're finally getting a chance to talk. Seems like I've been planning on doing this forever, and we just haven't had a chance to. And I saw you guys just open for one of my heroes, one of yours as well, I believe, Saxon, the other night. How'd that go?
Fantastic. Of all the bands we've ever opened for or played with, I mean, Saxon are one of my favorites, not just in terms of how much I like the band, but in terms of the way the band treated us and the way the show went. I mean, it was just great. The response was fantastic. I mean, we had a lot of our own fans show up, and the turnout for the show was pretty good, too. And we got to play, like, direct support right before Saxon. So it was great. We sold a ton of merchandise, and, yeah, it was just a really good time. Like, no stress at all.
All right, so let's talk MindMaze before we get into the album, because there's so many people out there who haven't had a chance to hear about you guys yet. Tell us a little bit, take us back if you were, and give us sort of the backstory of the band, how it all came together.
Basically, MindMaze has existed for about 3 to 3.5 years as of right now. Back from the Edge is our second album, which was released last October. Our first album, Mask of Lies, came out in February of 2013. Basically, for 7 or 8 years before that, we were a band called Necromance, but it was honestly kind of just like a kid band. We never really made any, big splash and like anything beyond like our local regional level, just kind of doing the stuff you do when you're like teenagers and you're just starting out and you want to kind of like get show experience and whatever. We recorded one pretty unprofessional demo as Necromance, but back in 2012 we just kind of decided we'd gone through a lineup change or two, and we'd just started recording the Mask of Lies album, and we were like, well, if we're ever going to change the name and kind of clean the slate and start over, this would be the time to do it. So our first album, Mask of Lies, was released 100% independently, and the second album was released through the Swedish label Inner Wound Recordings.
Right.
That's the Cliff Notes, anyway.
Yeah, Mask of Lies, very impressive debut, but last year, one of the best records of 2014, in my opinion, Back from the Edge. You can really hear how the band is growing. There's definitely more confidence in what you guys are doing now.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, first of all. I mean, it's honestly really great to hear that and hear from people that they feel like they can obviously hear that we've grown or that there's been an improvement, because we all unanimously thought so as well. Like when we were finished making Back from the Edge, we kind of all were like, yeah, we're really proud of this. We really think there's been a big improvement. So, I mean, to hear that coming from other people, it definitely makes us feel really good about where we are right now and, moving forward from there too.
I'm very excited, too, because they say the third album is where you really define your signature, and I'm really amped up for what that next record is going to sound like. But Back from the Edge is just so phenomenal, and one of the things that I would love to do is there's only 8 tracks on it, so I'd love to actually go through and hear the stories of each track, because that was always my favorite part when I was young. You'd open the albums, you remember that, and just read the liner notes and the lyrics, and you'd wonder about the stories behind them. And if you're up for that, I'd love to go through each of the tracks and just sort of talk about them, get the backstory from you guys. And you lead it off with the title track there, which sounds like this great song about perseverance and overcoming lyrically. But, yeah, I always like hearing about how the music came together, too, because you have so many layers to the things that you're doing, and it's just really impressive how you put it all together.
Well, thanks. I mean, stylistically, the opening track, the title track, was definitely like I really wanted to do like a full-blown power metal song. Like our debut album danced with it a little bit, but it's like there really aren't any like full-blown power metal songs on the first album. It's all kind of stuff that's either more progressive, melodic, or like traditional metal. There isn't a lot of super fast double bass drum kind of like, again, like old school European power metal kind of stuff, like Halloween, Gamma Ray, Firewind, bands like that that just have that sound. So, I mean, yeah, we'd never done that before, and that was like one big thing I really, really wanted to accomplish on this album. And I figured, for an opening track, I wanted to just like, pretty much just come out of the gate and, really, really, kick people in the ass. I mean, one of the things that people said they liked the most about Mask of Lies was that the first song, Never Look Back, like there's no, minute and a half intro track. There's no like, it doesn't really build. It just kind of gets right in your face right off the bat. So, this time around we kind of wanted to more or less stick to that same formula and, pretty much start as high octane as possible.
And you did that. Was I on the money there sort of lyrically with what you were going for, Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, that pretty much is like the general idea with that. I mean, lyrically, my kind of personal style is I basically write mostly about personal struggles or kind of emotions or things that people deal with in life. I try to write from experience. I try to write from real life things that I've experienced or, maybe something that someone else I know has, but I try not to write. We do it a little bit, but most of my stuff is not based on fiction or based on other works or books or, history or anything like that. It's usually based on things I've experienced in my own life. And I mean, that was the general idea with that song. It's kind of got a similar vibe to the whole, Never Look Back from Mask of Lies with, kind of overcoming adversity and kind of being now it's time to stand up for myself. It's time to kind of, come back from being at the breaking point and really being ready to kind of take control of things and take matters into your own hands.
So where does that lead us lyrically then on the story behind Through the Open Door?
Through the Open Door is it's funny because the title track was more about overcoming adversity and kind of being ready to stand up and take control and stuff. And Through the Open Doors, actually, I wrote it about feeling claustrophobic or feeling trapped or feeling trapped in a situation that you can't really seem to find a way out of. And it's about trying to mentally process that whole thing and sort of figure out how to find a way out. So it's funny that the first track was kind of about that general overcoming adversity thing, and then I think Through the Open Door just kind of takes a more specific approach into a kind of almost similar part of that whole struggle.
What were you looking to do sonically on Through the Open Door, Jeff?
I've always kind of described the vibe of that song as being kind of a mixture of some of the guitar riffs in there are really heavily inspired by early Dio stuff and maybe the first 5 Yngwie albums. It's a lot of the riffs really remind me of that type of stuff, but with a much more progressive edge to it. So basically if you took that stuff and kind of crossed it with maybe some Fates Warning or Queensryche or something, just something that definitely has a bit more of that there's a lot of tempo changes in it and a lot of feel changes in it, and I don't know, there's also a bunch of kind of Dream Theater-esque syncopated guitar and bass runs and stuff. So musically it just kind of has a little bit more of a frantic vibe to it than I think a lot of the rest of our stuff does, but that kind of goes hand in hand with the lyrics.
Well, one of the things that I loved about the album was, and I don't know how much thought you put into this, but was how cohesive, the continuity of it, I guess you should say, from how one song feeds into the other, and that one worked very well moving into Moment of Flight.
Yeah, I'm really, really big on album pacing. Or even show pacing with setlist. Yeah, anything having to do with song order, whether it's shows or albums or whatever. I'm a big nerd about that. I really like to sit and study stuff like that with albums I like and whatever. So with both albums, that was definitely a number one priority for me through the whole thing. Is how we need you need this type of song and this type of song and this type of song or whatever, and then you kind of need to work them together in a way that kind of it's paced properly so that not all the fast songs are right in a row and then not all the the longer songs are right in a row. It's kind of it's an up and down kind of thing. Musically, I actually think Moment of Flight was the first song we finished for this album. There's ideas in other songs that trace back further than that. Right. But I think Moment of Flight was the first one that we actually finished the music for, beginning to end. It's actually the only song we've ever done where we wrote as a group. Now, usually everyone has input on things. Like, even though I'm credited as the writer on most of the material, everyone kind of has a hand in the arrangement of the material, even though I'm usually the one writing the riffs and the guitar melodies and chord structures and stuff. But, everyone kind of puts their 2 cents in throughout the process. It's not like I'm out there telling everyone what to play all the time. But with that song, it was really inspired by a bass part our bassist Rich had, and we kind of just jammed on it, and I had a riff, and, I don't know, in the span of 1 or 2 times of working on it, the whole thing just kind of materialized. And stylistically, I would describe that song as kind of a mixture of maybe Dream Theater's Awake sound mixed with a Circus Maximus vibe. There's some stuff on their last album, 9, that kind of really does the whole 7-string groovy kind of riff thing, but with a more melodic, hooky chorus, but maybe more of a rhythmic feel to the vocals and the verses. So that was definitely kind of what we were going for musically there.
Right, and you mentioned the bass part too, which is interesting because Rich obviously didn't record this album. Mike Lepond of Symphony X came in and played on this album. How did his presence sort of impact the overall feel of the album?
Mike's involvement was, honestly, I genuinely think Mike is one of the best bass players in the world in this style of music. He just happens to be a friend of ours. It's, it was a really fortunate thing that we got to know him, and working with him has always been incredibly easy. Mike is pretty much the most professional musician I've ever worked with on any level. He always came, to every rehearsal, the recording session, everything showed up completely prepared. There was never nothing was ever difficult at any point of working with Mike, which was really, really nice. And yeah, playing wise, he completely destroyed. He recorded the bass tracks for the album in about, I think, a 4-hour studio session. It was ridiculous, but Mike's definitely a very busy bass player. Now, he's a really great busy bass player. There's some guys that do that don't have the solidity to back it up. He does, but I definitely think the bass is a bit more in your face with it being Mike than if it would have been most anyone else.
So lyrically, what about that one for you, Sarah?
Well, I remember I specifically, finished writing this song shortly after we did the whole opening for Motley Crue thing. And it wasn't specifically about that, but that song's just kind of coming from my personal standpoint of that feeling of just knowing this is what you're supposed to do, and this is that moment where you realize, this is what I want. This is my thing. This is where I belong. This is it. And for me, it's performing and being on stage and, playing music and that whole thing. So it's I wrote it shortly after we did that whole experience, and I kind of feel I sort of had a revelation in when it came to all of this and where we were at and how I just felt about the band in general.
Well, and that takes us to Dreamwalker, which is sort of, if there's a single on the album, that's sort of the single, if you will. Where were you going lyrically there? Because it's a very beautiful, beautiful song.
That song, it's funny because, most of everything that I write is kind of about realistic things or things that happen in real life. And I kind of tried to step outside of the lines there with this and kind of explore something else. It's kind of just about exploring parts of your own mind and not necessarily dreams themselves, but maybe just parts of your subconscious that you may have not realized were actually significant to your conscious, to what's going on in your day-to-day life. So it was kind of my stab at kind of taking a sort of fantasy kind of look at your own mind and consciousness and stuff like that. And that song was very, for me, inspired, lyrically, with the lyrical content and vocal style wise by Urban Breed. I've mentioned him, in other things that I've talked about, and apparently he's mentioned me in interviews of his, which is pretty awesome. But that, his whole style was kind of what I was sort of trying to go for with this whole song. So, that's where I was at.
And it came off really well. And yes, Urban does talk about you in interviews. As a matter of fact, when he and I spoke a few months ago, he hinted at maybe a duet in the future.
Yeah, this is actually, this is not public knowledge yet, but, well, it is for people who backed, we have a Dreamwalker EP coming out, in a couple of months. It's way overdue, but different factors got in the way. But, anyway, yeah, this Dreamwalker EP is going to have a lot of, extra tracks on it. I mean, obviously the song Dreamwalker is track 1, but there's some covers, and we did the whole thing through Kickstarter, and, the backers got to get involved in deciding some of the content. But anyway, one of the tracks on this EP is actually going to be an alternate version of Dreamwalker, that's done as a duet. Should be anyway. Still waiting on the tracks, but, they should be coming, almost, I would imagine, any day or any week now. And, we're pretty much wrapping up work on this EP right now. We're aiming to have it out over the summer.
Nice. And for those, because I know there's already people, myself included, wondering if we never got a chance to be part of that whole Kickstarter pledge. I don't know how you did it originally with the album. How could they go ahead and get a copy of something like that if they weren't originally part of that campaign?
We actually haven't come to a distinct decision on this yet, because originally this was supposed to be like an exclusive thing, but the problem we keep running into, when we did the Kickstarter project to fund Back from the Edge, we had the same problem as we do now, and it's a great problem to have, that overall popularity of the band keeps growing at such a pace where we do these projects and we offer rewards that are supposed to be exclusive, and then within like a 6-month time period, when we're actually getting down to maybe delivering the rewards, we have so many new fans that really genuinely care, but they weren't even around when we did the project. So we have to kind of keep finding ways to sort of honor the exclusivity of the original thing, but also finding a way to get the new people something. So we haven't decided yet whether we're just going to expand the physical pressing to maybe just, a bit more than it originally was supposed to be, and still say, well, it's a very limited edition thing, and there's only going to be a select number of copies for sale beyond the ones that are already, accounted for. Or what we might do is only offer it physically to those original pledgers and offer it as like a digital EP to everyone else, or I don't know, some kind of combination of these things is what we're probably going to end up doing. But it's definitely like something that I am torn about.
Tell us a little bit from the musical standpoint, Dreamwalker, from you, Jeff.
Well, the story, not about the sound, but about like the writing of this song that I always find interesting to tell people, is that Dreamwalker was actually the last song we wrote for the album. The album was basically written with a different track in place of Dreamwalker. It would have been track 4. It would have, same, I don't want to say same style, because it was a bit different, but, shorter, relatively up-tempo, kind of single-esque track, but didn't really sound the same. But anyway, we never even finished the track. We never wrote lyrics for it. There's not even like a good quality demo version of the track, but it is kind of sitting around on a hard drive somewhere. But we kind of got to I wrote and demoed the track myself, and then we kind of got to playing it as a band, and just kind of realized that we're like, nah, this just isn't really cutting it. It's just not really good enough. So we decided to ditch that song and write something else. And Dreamwalker was the song that, came out of that. And I find it hilarious that it ended up being the song that everyone felt so strongly about and was like, oh, we should use this as a single and, everything else. But when it comes to the music, I'm a huge Evergrey fan. I mean, they're one of my favorite bands. I have their symbol as a tattoo, but up until this point, we've never really displayed a huge influence in our music. But to me, that's definitely kind of what Dreamwalker is. I mean, overall, because of the vocal melodies and stuff, it takes a little bit more of like a poppy tone in the melody. Not poppy, but you know what I mean, melodic. But in terms of the guitar riffs, there's a lot of down-tuned, syncopated, heavy palm-muted kind of riffs going on. Especially there's like a bridge section, which is like practically like a breakdown. But that whole vibe for me really came out of the Evergrey sound and style. So yeah, normally the songs I'm like, well, it's a mixture of this, and this. Nah, I mean, musically for me, Dreamwalker is just kind of finally me doing an Evergrey worship song.
One of my favorite tracks on the album is obviously the beast of the album, right in the middle, The Machine Stops. Tell us a little bit about the musical aspect, the writing of it, and I've always wondered this because you've got so much going on with the guitars, and when you play live, it's just the four of you. How do you not end up with holes in the sound?
Well, it's funny when it comes to The Machine Stops. I guess I'll answer the live portion of the question first. We actually don't use backing tracks, and we don't use, we don't have any assistance, and we're
honestly very against that whole idea. In general, I mean, I'm not saying that it's completely
for some bands it works better than others, and I'm not out to crucify anyone who uses backing tracks, but when it comes to live performance, I come from a very, and it's weird because of my age, but it's I come from a very, very old school 70s mentality when it comes to live performance, and just that it's not really crucial to have every bell and whistle of an album reproduced live, and it's more about the energy of the performance and, the interaction with the band and the little things that you actually add live that aren't on the album. And, I don't know, just, I like the music to have a very, organic feel to it, and I like to have it breathe and be able to add and subtract from things live, as opposed to, being strapped to playing to a click track live in order to use backing tracks or whatever. But, the way we usually do The Machine Stops live to kind of compensate, because obviously it starts with piano and there's no way around that live. What we usually do is lately we've been opening with the song, which is kind of a burden to open your show with a 10.5-minute song, but we open with that song, and we actually use the first 30 to 45 seconds of the track as an intro tape. Right. So that plays over the PA, and then the band comes in, and then from there on, there's no assistance. But if we play it at another portion of the set, we'll usually drop into the song about a minute into the song. So again, it kind of eliminates that first part that's completely unavoidable to do without keyboards. But when it comes to pretty much everything else, I really look at the keyboards as just a layer to our sound. We're not really a band that has a lot of super, super prominent keyboard parts. I mean, that song is definitely getting up there in that regard, but
right.
Our songs are very riff-based. We're a guitar-oriented band. The keyboards are really mostly just there to add sonic layers in the studio, basically. Would it be cool sometimes to be able to have some of those extra little things? Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, and we've thought about it. I'm not against the idea of bringing a fifth person into the live equation. That's a Pagan's Mind DVD. But it's really complicated. I mean, the benefit of being a 4-person band when it comes to playing live is that, we can all travel in one car, all our gear fits in the trunk, we can all share a hotel room. There's a lot of logistical advantages to 4 people over 5. So, yeah, it's something that we've talked about, and I'm not ruling out for the future, but up to this point, it's just been kind of difficult. When it comes to the music of The Machine Stops, there's really 3 bands that I guess I'm all about name checking my influences. A lot of people really want to run. A lot of
people like to say, well, no, we're totally unique and we don't have any this doesn't sound like anything you've ever heard, and it's just dude, come on. Yeah, that's ridiculous. It always kind of sounds like something.
I'm all about, paying homage and name checking the influences we have and stuff rather than trying to run from them. But obviously, I think the big one that most people will notice right away, and it doesn't hurt, I guess, that Mike is on the album, is that there's a big Symphony X vibe to that song in parts. Particularly, the really heavy chugging guitar part with that piano melody behind it, has a very much an older Symphony X kind of vibe to it. Mm-hmm. And, I don't want to say it was intentional, but I kind of heard that all along as we were writing it. So there's that. The chorus of that song in particular, to me, reminds me a lot of Camelot. It just has a drum beat and kind of an overall flavor to it. That chorus just kind of reminds me of a Camelot chorus. Then when it comes to some of the instrumental stuff, specifically the section after the second chorus, there's a big, like, Kansas influence, which, I mean, in a way, Kansas was really just Symphony X in the 70s anyway, but yeah, there's a lot of, like, organs going on and, you know, odd time signatures, and I don't know, it just kind of has this sort of, like, old school prog rock as opposed to, like, new school prog metal feel to it. So there's also one random part in the instrumental section that has a very, like, Halloween Gamma Ray-esque guitar harmony in it when it gets really fast. But yeah, as usual, it's just kind of like a cross section of all of this stuff. And in terms of, like, writing that song, it definitely came together, like, in pieces. One or two of the main themes in the song were stuff I had laying around, and then I just kind of would work on, like, one section here or one section there, and I was like, well, I like this idea, and I want to kind of build a bridge to this idea. So, you know, it really just kind of gradually came together piece by piece by piece by piece, and I didn't really set out with the intention of having it be like, well, we got to get a 10-plus minute song on the album. In fact, there was a period where we were actually contemplating doing it as, like, 2 or 3 separate tracks, like, of all shorter lengths. But I mean, the same thing of what you're hearing, but just kind of broken up differently. But I don't know, it just kind of came together in pieces, and it just kind of came out the way it did.
Nice. So, and I know there's a story behind the lyrics, and this is one of those few times where you weren't talking about your own personal experience. Am I right, Sarah?
Yeah, this is, based on an actual, like, short story that someone wrote. It's by the same title, The Machine Stops, and the author is E.M. Forster. And it came out in the 20s.
Yeah.
I believe it came out in 1929. People can fact check that if they want. I'm pretty sure it was 1929. But what's interesting about this is that Jeff and I both had to take a class for both of our college, degrees. I mean, Jeff has the degree now. I don't yet, but that's another story. But, like, we both had to take this same class called Mass Culture, and it was a required reading that we had to write a paper on for this class. And Jeff actually took the class before I did, and I remember him, like, being at home and being like, yo, you should really check out this, The Machine Stops. Like, this is pretty cool. We should, like, write something about this or something. And I'm like, yeah, no, shut up. I don't have time to do that. Like, whatever. Like, I just kind of was like, okay, whatever. But then it was funny because then I ended up having to read it myself for the same class and write a paper on it. And I'm like, well, I have to read it now, so I might as well, pay attention or whatever. And I ended up really liking it too and really thinking it was cool. And I mean, it's always interesting to, like, read things like that written in, like, such a time period. Like, I can't imagine somebody writing something so futuristic or something so, like, dystopian in, like, the 20s. Like, I just don't even know how anyone's brain was possibly, like, focused on any of these things. But I mean, I just thought it was a really cool thing because even though it's about this futuristic science fiction kind of dystopian society, thing, the underlying, like, theme and the most important part of the story is how it all goes with human emotion and how that's, like, that's the secret. Like, that's the secret to everything. Like, despite all this crazy stuff that's happening and all these things that are going wrong in this world and all that, it's like it all leads back to the human emotion thing and how, like, the connection from person to person is what's most important in our lives. So I was really drawn to that because I'm like, okay, this is fiction, but it's still kind of going along with, like, a lot of the same sorts of topics and a lot of the same sorts of things that I like to write about. And I mean, like, vocally, I kind of just tried to go for, there's certainly more, like, dramatic vibe to the vocals, to the vocal melodies. I mean, I'd probably say overall it's like, a mix of Russell Allen with some, like, Steve Walsh from Kansas and, like, maybe a little bit of, like, a Camelot vibe in some of the verses with some of those melodies. So I kind of just tried to give it a more, like, theatrical vibe. And I mean, a lot of people have had a lot of positive comments about this song, and I'm happy about that because if I was going to pick a favorite song off the album, this is my favorite. So
this is actually this is my favorite song that we've done.
I mean, yeah,
both albums.
Well, and I think between all of us, I mean, I don't think it's everyone's favorite song I mean, it's ours, but I mean, everyone else really likes it too, so it's, it's always good to hear people say that they also really like, your favorite song.
My favorite song off the album is Consequence of Choice. First time I heard that, I just absolutely fell in love with it. And the little film clip in there as well with Morgan Freeman just sells the whole thing. I get chills every time I hear it.
Well, I guess I'll kind of start because of the whole like Morgan Freeman thing. It's funny because we use that clip, so a lot of people probably assume that song was written about the Shawshank Redemption, but it wasn't. Like, it really wasn't written about that. It's just that, for whatever reason, it happened to be on or something, and we just thought that it was, like, the perfect thing to put there. It, like, summed up perfectly, like, what we were talking about. I mean, this song was written from a personal experience of mine. I mean, I've kind of held back from going, like, too specific into detail just because, out of respect for the situation, but,
Right.
I mean, to kind of put it in as much general terms as I can, I know somebody who ended up going to prison. They've been in prison for a few years over a choice they made to drink and drive. That's what this song was written about. It was all about that moment that you make that decision that can affect the rest of your life, that this one choice that you make can just ruin your life basically, or completely change it, either way. It wasn't written about the Shawshank Redemption. It was about somebody else I know that ended up, in prison for a kind of similar choice, I guess, but we happened to be watching that, and then that kind of just perfectly summed it up, so that's how that ended up in the song. Good people make bad decisions, and I think that's kind of like part of what it goes into. It's like, just because you may have made a really terrible choice doesn't mean that you're a terrible person, but you have to live with that.
Some of the guitar work on there, though, I mean, such great melody.
The thing about the solo section in Consequence of Choice is that's actually the one long solo section on the album where I actually play all the solos. All of the other songs with kind of long multi-part solo sections have another guitarist to kind of break them up, various guests that I asked to, and they're all friends, but
Right.
It's various people I asked to play other solos, or, Jens's keyboard solo or whatever. So that one section is the one really long, extended, one piece solo that I kind of did totally on my own. But I don't know. I like a lot of the riffs in that song. It's a good riff song. It's very dark. I actually think, and I mean, it perfectly goes with the subject matter, but I mean, I think it's hands down the darkest song we've done up to this point in terms of, just the overall tone of the song. The riffs are very heavy. And I actually think of all our songs, it's the one that is the best live. When we started to put the new material in the live set, it went in right away. And then we did a couple of shows where we kind of didn't play it as much. And as soon as it went away, we were like, I missed that song. And also, it's weird. I've read a number of reviews for the album where people were like, Consequence of Choice stands out less than other songs. But then there's all these other people that say it's their favorite song on the album. So
yeah, I'd say it's a very polarizing song apparently. And I mean, it's for us, it's weird because this was a song that I was like, yeah, I can't wait for people to hear this one. Because, they're going to, really, I was really happy with it, and I thought it would be one that would, hopefully grab people. But, it seems to be 50-50 with people who really love it or people who don't think it's memorable.
Yeah, but, the thing is that only really seems to be true on the album. I think for whatever reason live, it just always goes so well. I don't know what it is about it, just the overall, maybe it's because we play it a little faster live, or the guitar is more in the forefront live, or whatever, but it just comes off as really good. It also gives us a chance, we're, again, like I said, we're really big on doing everything legitimately or organically, and that song gives us one of the better opportunities to show off using multiple singers doing harmony stuff live, which I really, really love. But yeah, like I said, I mean, again, if I had to choose one band, I'd say there's a dose of Evergrey in there, more older Evergrey, actually, like their first couple albums, as opposed to Dreamwalker, which is kind of more in the vein of their newer stuff. But there's not a great story behind the writing of the music for that one.
And then End of Eternity, I've noticed, is in quite a few of your set lists, so you're getting a lot of live action with that one. What's the story there?
That one just happens to, I don't know, it, again, goes well live. It's got a different feel than a lot of the other material on the album and whatever, because it's for the most part, it's more of like a mid-paced song. It has like more of a, I would describe the groove of that song as being kind of like an 80s style guitar riff. It reminds me a lot of like Queensryche, or like a Saxon riff, or like something like that. Like just more of an old school kind of flavor to it. The chorus has, like a nice melodic flow to it, but I don't know. Again, it goes well live. Sometimes the songs just end up in the live set list because, again, like I said, I'm big on like pacing and song order and stuff. So some songs tend to show up more or less live because they're easier to fill spaces with. And that's the way End of Eternity kind of works. It's a really good song that we can just add as a singular song. Like if we put a set list together and it's like 7 songs and we got 5 more minutes, it's really easy just to be like, all right, throw End of Eternity there in the middle or whatever. And, again, it goes well live. There's a lot of good opportunities for people to like, hey along with the, with the beat or whatever. But right. Yeah, again, just like I said, to me, that's a very old school sounding song musically. And that was one of the, I don't know, there's a couple of songs that kind of came about in a like streak of songs. Like the first couple of songs we wrote for the album were like Through the Open Door, Moment of Flight, and the sequel to Destiny Calls, which obviously we'll get to in a minute here. But those were like the first couple. And then Back from the Edge, Consequence of Choice, and End of Eternity were all things that I wrote and demoed within probably a couple weeks of each other. It was like a nice, real like streak of inspiration I had where it's like it was pretty much like at that point that we really got to get a feel for like the overall sound and shape that the album was starting to take. And I really liked that one. And even though, again, I'm kind of trading off guitar solos on that one, I'm really, really proud of my own solos on that track.
Well, that's got to be interesting, too. When you play live, you end up having to play what somebody else wrote as the counterpoint to yours. So
yeah, it definitely gets to be a bit much sometimes, where especially if we play a lot of those songs with long instrumental sections back to back, where like 3 songs in a row, I'm having to play like these really, really long solo sections. When it comes to my like approach to playing or whatever, I'm not a very disciplined player when it comes to learning other people's solos. Like if we're gonna do a cover, I usually will put in the effort to like get it pretty close. But like with the solos on the album, I'm trying to match all these guys with all these wildly different solo styles. So I kind of try to again stay faithful to like the vibe of what they're playing, and if there's like a really, really memorable melody in it, I'll try to make sure that I preserve that. But otherwise, for some of these, I am kind of just I improvise a lot. So.
And what about lyrically on that one, Sarah?
As far as like what this song's about specifically, it was kind of me kind of looking at the future and like just the endless possibilities that are out there, and what if things end up this way, or what if things end up that way, and like what if you take this road or this door, or what's on the other side of that, or that's kind of just what I was thinking like mentally. This one doesn't really have a very like great creative story. I kind of just was thinking of something that would be interesting to write a song about, and this is kind of where I ended up.
Let's get to the final one then. It's sort of, the word is so overused, but it fits here. The epic piece, the other big one to end it. Because you guys did Destiny Calls on Mask of Lies album. This is Onward, Destiny Calls 2. You sort of picking up where it left off. And I believe Kalen, this is sort of his story idea. Isn't it something about pirates or whatnot?
Yep, Kalen's, super creative in that he's a lyrical master. But I mean, no, I don't know. Kalen's always had a thing for pirates. I'm not really sure why, but he just has. That's just always been something he likes. So it just sounds funny because usually we wouldn't I normally wouldn't choose to write a song about such an overdone kind of cliche
there's something that I think
but
there's something that I think's worth noting about the whole Destiny Calls being about pirates thing. When we wrote Destiny Calls originally, like I said, we've been doing this for like 11 years now in various forms, and a lot of the songs on Mask of Lies date back years before that album actually was recorded. Some of them were relatively newer at the time, but yeah, Destiny Calls was actually, I think, the second oldest song on that album. Breaking the Chains is definitely the oldest, I know that, but Destiny Calls was written as far back as like 2006, I think. And I mean, for the most part, it stayed the same. It wasn't redrafted or rewritten a whole lot over the years, but the subject matter of doing a song, about pirates or whatever, seemed a lot less cliche or hokey to us at that age, and also with the atmosphere of what kind of the metal community was like back then. It was kind of before the big obviously, like, Running Wild's been around forever doing the whole pirate thing, but like, I know Ailstorm wasn't even like a thing back then. And it's like, now I think the whole, like, pirates, like, I don't know, almost any aspect of the, like, nerd culture thing, pirates, ninjas, comic books, whatever, it's like all that stuff seems a lot more cliche in a way now than it did 10 years ago. So, but I mean, again, our thing with Destiny Calls was always that, it's about pirates, but it doesn't beat you over the head with being about pirates.
I never noticed it was about pirates until I just read about it today.
Yeah, it's more like, I don't want to, go into Sarah's territory here, but it's like the lyrics are more about the whole, the lyrics are more about the mentality, I guess, of being a pirate, rather than recounting the actual, like, specific things that they do, or whatever. It's just, I don't know, it was kind of just it was our attempt at kind of mixing something a little more fun and lighthearted with kind of our normal approach to things. And the original, has definitely, it's a constant, like, live staple for us, because it just, I don't know, the riffs just have, like, a fun feel to them, and it's a good crowd participation song, and, just kind of always just works its way into our live set list. So it was definitely a fan favorite from the first album. And when it came to writing this one, it was Kalen's idea to do a sequel to it, and at first I kind of laughed it off, and I was like, haha, funny, because it was never really a huge story. The original song was not like a huge story-driven song where it really felt like a sequel was even a thing that should happen, but we got a little carried away, or I guess I should say I got a little carried away with the whole possibility of getting to take, an 8.5-minute song and completely reimagine it to write a sequel to it, where, I'm not sure how many of them some people get versus how many of them they don't, but there's probably like 50 little musical nuggets in Destiny Calls 2 that are little, like, variations on themes or melodies or chord structures or riffs or whatever from the original, where we kind of took them and just applied them in different contexts, and, wrote parts that were like complete reversals of parts and other things. Like, that song, in a sense, musically for me, was purely masturbatory in that sense. Let's have the most fun we can, just completely rewriting things and reimagining them and, whatever. But it also gave us some opportunities to do some kind of cool dynamic stuff and, incorporate the flute stuff and the sound effects and, I don't know, everything else. So, I don't know, it was a fun kind of way to end the album, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely an amazing piece of ear candy there. Did you have any final input on that one, Sarah?
I mean, not really as far as, like, what it's about. I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory, but, I mean, yeah, it was just fun, and I like adding stuff and doing different, like, little bits, like the flute. I mean, people always ask anymore, it seems, are you guys going to put more flute on your songs? And I mean, no, we're not, because I don't want that to become, like, what I do in the band. Like, it never really was meant for that. Like, it was kind of just meant for a fun sort of little extra. Like, it's definitely cool that I know how to play, because I think it adds a nice texture, and I definitely think it's better to do it, like, for real than to be like, oh, we want a flute part here, so let's just play it on keyboards and try and make it sound, like it's real. I think it's better to have somebody actually play, and I happen to know how to play, so it's kind of a cool thing to have. But, I mean, as far as adding it more often, like, I definitely don't plan on it. It's not supposed to be, like, an instrument I play in the band. It's just kind of, like, a little thing that we happen to do. It'd kind of just be like if we had a session musician. It's just that I happen to be the one that knows how to play.
Right, it's a nuance thing.
Yeah.
All right, I've stolen you guys for a long while, so before we get out of here, you guys wrote this stuff a while ago. And I know there's new music in the works already. As a matter of fact, I believe, Sarah, you were like asking the fans the other day, are you ready for some weird shit? Tell us about what's going on with new music and when we might hope to hear something.
Well, in the short term, the one thing you can look forward to is that there is a new original studio track that's going to be on the Dreamwalker EP called Slave to the Cycle, which is probably, honestly, the most... I don't know. I would say in a way it's the most like kind of like hard rock melodic metal type track we've done. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's heavy. There's riffs in there and everything, but I don't know. The vocals have like kind of like a powerful AOR flavor to them, and
which like just to open up about that sort of thing. I mean, that's like my favorite style. I love metal, and I like a lot of different things, and some of these like prog bands and stuff like that. But honestly, this like melodic rock AOR stuff is more or less like my favorite style of music these days. So it was kind of fun to like have a standalone track that we did that kind of seemed like that stuff would apply to, that I feel like I could do that with, because in general, obviously we're not a melodic rock AOR band, so I wouldn't normally want to make all our songs have this super poppy vocal thing going on. But, for a kind of standalone track that's just going to be on an EP, it was easier to just be experimental with that and kind of just do something sort of more in that style.
And the other thing, too, and this kind of actually sets up the second part of the answer to this question, is that, yeah, this track just has a vibe to it that we just decided that it would be a really good track to use on like an EP or something as an extra track, because it just is not going to fit the overall like scheme or picture for the third album. I haven't really said a whole lot about this yet because, I mean, honestly, a lot of the ideas are still very much in the infancy stage, and we don't want to tell people too much too soon. And, also you don't want to write yourself into a corner where you can't get out of things you've already talked about. But right. We have decided that the third album is going to be a concept album, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot about specifics. I will say that it's like going to be very much lyrically in the vein of, I think, what people would come to expect from us up to this point. It's not going to be like a sci-fi story. It's not going to be, like something. It's going to deal a lot with, again, human emotion, real life events, real things like that. It's going to be more of a concept album in the sense that maybe like the latest Evergrey album is a concept album, or like Fate's Warning's A Pleasant Shade of Grey is a concept album, where they're albums that are more about self-realization and, a personal struggle or whatever, rather than, it still has a story arc, but it's just less like a character driven or whatever than maybe like one of these more like power metal opera type, concept albums or something. But anyway, I'm telling way more than I thought I would.
I'm not trying to tell you a lot, but I'm going to tell you what the whole album's about.
Let me reel you back in before you give it all up.
But that's all you get in that regard. But musically speaking, there's no question in my mind that the third album is going to be by far the most diverse album we've done up to this point. Very little of it is actually completely materialized. The entire approach to writing this album actually is going a lot differently than we have in the past, which was kind of one song at a time, get ideas together, put a demo together, work on it together. Whereas this time, because we want it to be a concept album and we want it to be a well-written concept album that has a lot of recurring themes and like arcing musical ideas and stuff, we're trying to write it in more of a big picture sense, where we're dealing with a lot of smaller ideas and we're going to try to string them all together. Not that there won't still be songs in the conventional sense, but, you know, we're working with like a ton of small pieces right now, as opposed to saying, well, we have X number of songs written. I would say about 40% of the music is materialized at this point. I mean, that's a complete random guess, but again, I have a picture in my mind for what we're really going for here. So I just know that it's in order to tell this story and kind of express these emotions the way that we're going to want to do, we're just definitely going to be more all over the map, stylistically speaking. Not that it won't sound like, you know, us, so to speak, but, you know, there's going to be faster and heavier stuff and more aggressive stuff than we've ever done before. However, there's also going to be a lot more like dynamic, softer, melodic, and like even like ballad-like mellow parts and stuff.
Wow.
It's just really going to be more of everything, basically. And in terms of a timetable, what we're kind of looking at right now is hoping to have the music materialized and arranged and stuff by, I don't know, the fall sometime, so that maybe we can do pre-production stuff around the end of the year and like start tracking legitimately early next year. Because of everyone's work situations and the way our lives always work, like doing anything from like Thanksgiving through like the first week of January is like next to impossible. We usually don't even try to gig during that frame. We'll probably end up tracking the album starting in January or February, and we're trying not to lock ourselves down to a real rigid time frame here, because this next album is really going to be like my baby, and I'm not going to want to finish it prematurely. Optimistically speaking, I would say we could potentially be looking at like September of next year. I think if you miss the end of October, maybe like the first week of November, you're usually better off actually sitting on it for like the last 7 weeks of the year and then releasing it at the beginning of the new year, just because of the way so much about album visibility has so much to do with getting on year-end lists and like recap lists, and the way people always, you know, so many people that are really into listening to music think of everything in terms of the calendar year. And once December comes, it's game over, you know, basically it's time to recap. And a lot of stuff that flies under the radar near the end of the year, once it gets to be like January or February, most people are like, that was last year, I don't care about that.
Are you guys planning on doing another Kickstarter program?
Yeah.
Yep, we'll be doing another one for the next album. I mean, I would probably say we'll be looking to do that like in the fall.
Yeah, like probably around the end of the year, like November-ish or something. I mean, it'll kind of depend on what our pace for doing the album is looking like at that time. But, you know, we really do need the money to actually get in there and record in the studio. So we like to kind of set up the timing so that we do the project, and then when the project ends, we get like, you know, right into the studio. So if we're looking at starting to record in January, the project will probably run like November or December or something. And, you know, we're always brainstorming new ways to, you know, give people better rewards, and, you know, we're always looking for input from people on what they want. And as always, you know, we're trying to raise more money, but I mean, that's not for us. That's just, we're trying to raise more money so we can do more things with it. You know, if we raise the kind of money we're looking at on the next album, we're hoping that we can entertain the idea of doing stuff like maybe pressing the next album on vinyl, or maybe doing more touring in more places, and, you know, whatever.
Thank you so much for letting us steal you for so long and giving us such in-depth information and all of this.
All right, thank you.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Take care.